Well, hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do something a little, it seems very frivolous with everything going on in the world. A book haul revisit. Like I said, there's a lot going on in the world. There's the pandemic, the protests, J.K. Rowling. But, I think for my own mental energy, and I'm sure for a lot of other people, I need to do something fun, something that's going to distract me a little bit, something that's not super serious. Especially since I did a video about J.K. Rowling and what she said, and I'm not going to talk about that here. I will say the vast majority of the comments were lovely and nice and supportive. There were many that were not. It's hard to feel like you constantly need to explain to people why they should care. And I'm not going to go into it now, but for anybody who left a nice comment on that video, a supportive comment for the people who said that it made a difference for them, I really appreciate that. If you are one of the other people, it is what it is. But let's just do a book haul. So these are the books that I brought into my library in June of 2019. By the way, it is evening where I live, which means I feel like I can actually film in this direction and not have a ghostly halo from the sun behind me, which is kind of nice. On top of everything else, work has been really crazy, so I didn't have time to film anything this morning. My boss is actually on the East Coast, so he's 2 hours ahead of me, so I've lost I usually film in the morning before the day starts, and that's not working. Anyway, let's just get to the haul revisit. So I brought 14 books into my library in June of 2019. Let's run through them, and then we'll see how many I have read. Let's start. The first one I have actually talked about a fair amount. It's the Stonewall Reader. This is edited by the New York Public Library, and I've talked about it a lot recently because it is Pride Month, which is why I got it last year. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and I wanted to read this as a sort of tribute to that, which is also why they released it. This was a buddy read with Ollie Bliss, and it was my first ever buddy read, and it was a really good experience. We got to compare notes about our own stories and compare them to the stories in the book. The reason I've been recommending it a lot recently is that it has a lot of really great intersectional stories. It explores queer history from a lot of different angles. It has stories from Black queer people, lesbians, gay people, transgender people, sometimes people who cross multiple different lines, and a lot of different stories. And I think that's one of the things that makes this really interesting. By the way, this is a beautiful, beautiful book. It actually has a dust jacket. That is the real cover. It is published by Penguin, in case you couldn't tell. And they just did a beautiful job. So in case you couldn't tell, I did read this one. So there you go. We're off to a great start with the Stonewall Reader. Then we have Damian Barr's You Will Be Safe Here. This is a book I was really excited to read when I got it, and am still very excited to read. I mentioned that I had created a TBR for the month of June that would feature books for Pride, like gay authors, gay subject matter, and this was actually on my original one. I ended up scrapping that list to focus on Black authors, Black stories, and things like that. So, sorry, Damian Barr. I still really want to read it, and it seems like the LGBTQ books I didn't get to last June circled back around and I wanted to get to this year. South Africa, 1901. It is the height of the Second Boer War. Sarah Vanderwatt and her 6-year-old son Fred are taken from their farm by force to Bloemfontein, I don't know if I said that correctly, concentration camp. Here the English soldiers promise you will be safe. Johannesburg, 2010. 16-year-old Willem is an outsider who just wants to be left alone with his books and his dog. Worried he's not turning out right, his ma and her boyfriend send him to New Dawn Safari Training Camp where they make men out of boys, guaranteed. You Will Be Safe Here is a powerful and urgent novel of two connected South African stories. It uncovers a hidden colonial history, reveals a dark contemporary secret, and explores our capacity for cruelty and kindness. I mean, come on. I really do want to read that. I'm very excited to get to this at some point. Unfortunately, I didn't get to it in the first year that I've had the copy of the book, but I will at some point. And then this is actually another book that had been originally on my TBR for this month. It's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This takes the form of a letter that a son writes to his mother. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is a letter from a son to a mother who cannot read. Written when the speaker, Little Dog, is in his late 20s, the letter unearths a family's history that began before he was born. A history whose epicenter is rooted in Vietnam and spans to Hartford, Connecticut, and serves as a doorway into parts of his life his mother has never known. All of it leading to an unforgettable revelation. At once a witness to the fraught yet undeniable love between a single mother and her son, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is also a brutally honest exploration of race, class, masculinity, asking questions central to our American moment, immersed as we are in addiction, violence, and trauma, but undergirded by compassion and tenderness. It is as much about the power of telling one's own story as it is about the obliterating silence of not being heard. Again, if that description doesn't grab you, I honestly don't know what to say. It grabs me. I am still interested in reading this book. Looking forward to doing it. I can't believe I didn't manage to fit it in the first year. I've heard mixed things about it on BookTube, but I'm still just really excited to give it a try. When this book was released, it seemed like a big front runner for major awards, and it just never got any traction with that, which is kind of surprising. But I'm still looking forward to reading it. Around this time last year, I was newly on my Pulitzer Prize project. I had just announced it, had just committed to the idea of wanting to do it. So in the month of June last year, I bought a couple of books that would kind of set me on my way. One of them was this really fancy edition of The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. I also did a 5-star prediction video based on my Pulitzer Prize project. By the way, I will link my original book haul from June 2019 down below. I will also link my 5-star predictions video. The Good Earth is one of the ones that I really am excited to read and think I'm just going to love. And look at that pretty, pretty cover. It is a Reader's Digest edition, and it has some little supplemental material inside, but it has these gorgeous illustrations. Let me see. Oh, somebody dog-eared a page. How dare they? And of course, now I can't find an illustration. Here's one. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful version of this book, which is a classic and which I am very much looking forward to. If you follow along, you know that I did not get around to starting my Pulitzer Prize project until just I started the book in March and finished it at the end of May, and I did a video about it. I'll link that down below too. Why not? Let's just link everything. I mean, look how pretty. I love it, and I'm still really looking forward to this. Now, last year was my first year on BookTube, and in the beginning I was doing a lot of kind of videos that involved things that were already on my shelf, like and a lot of get to know you things, and I kept referring to Pride and Prejudice, but I didn't own a copy of Pride and Prejudice. So finally I broke down and I went to the used bookstore near me, and I found this copy. I'm trying to make sure you can see it in the light of Pride and Prejudice, and I grabbed it. I hope you can see it because the light is kind of doing weird things, but there's a ghost Darcy on a horse. I think that's a ghost Darcy. I don't really know. I don't understand. But it was the only copy of it they had that was not either ridiculously expensive or like about to fall apart. So, oh well, I have a copy of Pride and Prejudice. And it's a bit of a cheat because this is something I had already read and enjoyed a lot. We were recently debating in a Voxer group the merits of the BBC Pride and Prejudice or the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice. And I am a diehard for the BBC Pride and Prejudice. Drop your opinion down below because I would love to hear. Let's start a fight. This time last year, I also joined Book of the Month Club. And by the way, somebody asked me recently if I'm one of those Book of the Month ambassadors. I am not. They don't pay me. I don't get anything for free. I am just a member. And actually, they ran into a spot of trouble with recent protests around Black Lives Matter. And they reacted really badly at first. And then they came out with a statement that's supposed to be an action plan. So I believe technically, my membership was supposed to end this month because it was a year, but I got some credits for customer service problems, so my membership actually lasts through the summer. So I figure I'm going to give them through the summer to see if they follow through on that action plan. And if they don't, I'm just going to let it go. But no, I am not affiliated with Book of the Month. I am just somebody who joined because I had been looking at membership boxes and decided one might be a fun thing to do. So my first official Book of the Month choice was Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane, but because it was my first box, I had a coupon code for a free add-on, and then I paid for another add-on because it was only $9. So there are 2 more Book of the Month books to come. Anyway, Ask Again Yes was the first one that I chose, and let's do the plot description. Francis Gleason and Brian Stanhope, 2 rookie cops in the NYPD, live next door to each other outside the city. What happens behind closed doors in both houses, the loneliness of Francis's wife Lena and the instability of Brian's wife Anne, sets the stage for explosive events to come. Ask Again Yes is a deeply affecting exploration of the lifelong friendship and love that blossoms between Francis and Lena's daughter Kate and Brian and Anne's son Peter. Luminous, heartbreaking, and redemptive, Ask Again Yes reveals the way childhood memories change when viewed from the distance of adulthood. Villains lose their menace, and those who appeared innocent seem less so. Kate and Peter's love story, while tested by echoes from the past, is marked by tenderness, generosity, and grace. I was particularly interested in that part about memory and how it shifts over time. I just never got around to reading it. I have heard mostly positive things about this, a little bit of some mixed opinion, but to be honest, I have not heard a whole lot. So that was Ask Again Yes. The next title I got from Book of the Month is something of a cheat because I had actually already read it. I think I read this book in May of last year, and because of the way it is structured, I really wanted to take a look at the book in person, and I kind of wanted to have it around because it's Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And if you're unfamiliar, it's compared to the story of like Fleetwood Mac because it's about a band that is creating what will become like a landmark album, and it's about them falling apart as they go through this very stormy creative process. There are like love triangles and things like that, and drugs and alcohol, and it's told in the style of an oral history, which I have always thought would be a very interesting way of writing a novel. And I listened to this on audio first, which was fantastic because they got a bunch of actors. The only actor, Judy Greer is in it as well, but the one I remembered at first was Jennifer Beal, who does Daisy Jones. So basically, they have an entire cast who reads the story, and it was a really good production. Sometimes I wonder if I enjoyed this book as much as I did because I listened to the audiobook, and I thought that was a really interesting way of doing that. I do think, and I'm not, no spoilers, but there is a bit of a problem with the ending of this book. I don't think it quite sticks the landing, but I was just really fascinated by the story, and I was surprisingly moved by it. And again, I think a lot of that comes down to the performance of the actors in the audiobook. So I wanted to make sure I had a copy of the book, and I had a credit for a free book since it was my first ever Book of the Month membership, so I spent it on this. And then I decided to do one more add-on that month and get Circe by Madeline Miller because I heard so many good things, especially this time last year. People were still really talking about this book. So when it was there and available, I decided to snatch it up. And also because I was on a wait list for the audio of The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and the wait list was even longer for Circe, so I figured if I can get a physical copy, I don't want to have to wait for a copy from my library of the audio. If you're unfamiliar, and honestly I think everybody probably is familiar, in the house of Helios, god of the sun and the mightiest of the Titans, a daughter is born. But Circe is a strange child, not obviously powerful like her father, nor viciously alluring like her mother. Turning to the world of mortals for companionship, she discovers that she does possess power, the power of witchcraft, which can transform rivals into monsters and menace the gods themselves. Threatened, Zeus banishes her to a deserted island where she hones her occult craft, tames wild beasts, and crosses paths with many of the most famous figures in all of mythology. But there is danger too, for a woman who stands alone, and Circe unwittingly draws the wrath of both men and gods, ultimately finding herself pitted against one of the most terrifying and vengeful of the Olympians. To protect what she loves most, Circe must summon all her strength and choose once and for all whether she belongs with the gods she is born from or the mortals she has come to love. Circe is a triumph of storytelling, an intoxicating epic of family rivalry, palace intrigue, love and loss, as well as a celebration of indomitable female strength in a man's world. I mean, it sounds great, and when people talk about mythic retellings, which have been fairly popular lately, this is one that comes up a fair amount. However, I did get the audio of The Song of Achilles in, I think, June, and I listened to it. I didn't like it. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people out there do like it. I did not at all. So I really deprioritized Circe on my TBR. I still would like to get to it at some point, but I think I need a really long break. I really kind of did not like The Song of Achilles. Maybe that's unfair to Circe, but I need to take a little more time before I get around to this. So I'm not going to get rid of it, but I'm suspicious. Let's put it that way. Also in June, at this time last year, one of our stores in town was closing down, and they had a copy of Gillian Flynn's Dark Places, basically for like $1. So I snapped it up and figured at some point, if I wanted to, I could just read it for fun. I have only read one book by Gillian Flynn. Of course, that book is Gone Girl. Never got around to Dark Places in the last year, but might as well leave it on my shelf because, you know, sometimes you need a thriller and gotta grab it, and I can't do J.K. Rowling's Cormoran Strike books anymore. So it could come in handy. And I also never saw the TV show that was adapted from this. So if you're unfamiliar, Libby Day was 7 when her mother and 2 sisters were murdered in the Satan sacrifice of Kinnicky, Kansas. She survived and famously testified that her 15-year-old brother Ben was the killer. 25 years later, the Kill Club, a secret society obsessed with notorious crimes, locates Libby and pumps her for details. They hope to discover proof that may free Ben. Libby hopes to turn a profit off of her tragic history. She'll reconnect with the players from that night and report her findings to the club for a fee. As Libby's search takes her from shabby Missouri strip clubs to abandoned Oklahoma tourist towns, the unimaginable truth emerges, and Libby finds herself right back where she started, on the run from a killer. Sounds like a fun, entertaining thriller. So yeah, worth keeping around and getting to at some point. Here we get back to the Pulitzer Prize project, because originally, when I launched it, my original intent was to read all of them in order. Obviously, I got away from that. Basically, over time, I started thinking it's going to be a lot to do it in order. And I kind of like having the freedom of moving around in time. Kelly, from Books I'm Not Reading, had actually done all of the Pulitzer Prize books. And when I said that I wanted to read them in order, she did a video calling me crazy, and she was right. Kelly, if you're watching this, you were right. So I wanted to start with the very first Pulitzer Prize winner, which was His Family by Ernest Poole. Interestingly, a lot of people say he won the first Pulitzer Prize for His Family because of a different book of his, The Harbor, which was published 2 or 3 years earlier, and which was a wild critical success. However, the Pulitzer Prize did not exist at the time, so obviously he could not win it. So a lot of people think his win for His Family is because of The Harbor. And when I was in a bookstore trying to see if I could either get a copy of His Family or order it, they did not have His Family. They were unable to order it, but they had a copy of The Harbor on the shelf, so I figured, you know what, I'm going to make that a supplemental read to my Pulitzer Prize project and do both. I read The Harbor, figuring that His Family would be the first book that I got to in my Pulitzer Prize project, and I didn't get to it. I can't remember what happened in July, but then in August was Women in Translation Month. Then I don't remember what I did in September, but then it was Victober, then there was Nonfiction November, and then in December I prioritized some other books to get in before the end of the year, thinking I would just be able to loop right back around and start the new year with it, and here we are in June and I still haven't read it, but I did manage to read Lonesome Dove, which I selected for March of the Mammoths and finished, and I did my video of it, which is the one I will link down below. So His Family is a quiet story about a family. There's no description on the back of the book, and there's basically, I think there's no copyright on this book, so it's been published by an independent press, and it doesn't have a blurb on it, and I'm not going to look it up right now. It's about a patriarch and I think his 2 daughters. It is very much about the societal changes, but in a quiet family way that were going on in 1917, and that is kind of how it ended up winning the Pulitzer Prize, because people felt it reflected those changes very well. However, people mostly think he won because of this. As I said, The Harbor is a 1915 socialist masterpiece by the first recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. But this book. For Billy, an aspiring writer struggling to reconcile his sympathy for the working man with his middle-class allegiance to capitalist progress, the New York waterfront becomes a window on the world. There he bears witness to the explosive tensions between labor and capital, falling under the influence of 2 divergent mentors: Dylan, an accomplished engineer and friend of the establishment, and Kramer, who has forsaken every comfort to live in the slums and preach the gospel of unionism. When the harbor erupts in violence, Billy must choose for himself which path to follow. So obviously Billy is sort of a cipher. He is caught between labor protests and riots and social upheaval. The patriotic fervor of World War I, if I remember correctly, kind of helped stamp out the socialist movement. So even just a couple of years later, The Harbor was already sort of out of fashion. But it was an interesting book. But spoiler alert, I was kind of meh about it. I don't do well with books that are, the characters are much more obviously symbolism, which is funny because I actually really like Animal Farm and Lord of the Flies. But in this book, I felt like it was done in a kind of clumsy way. People are not really people so much as they are tokens that are moved around to make political points. But it's a fine book. And then we have The Magnificent Ambersons by Booth Tarkington. This was the second book that won the Pulitzer Prize, I believe. And it's another book that I'm really anticipating that I will like for my Pulitzer Prize project. The premise is, this is the epic story of an American family's traumatic tumble from the dizzying heights of fame and fortune. A dynasty spanning 3 generations, the Ambersons' preeminence as society's elite is threatened, not only by a hungry new breed of industrial entrepreneur, but from its own arrogance and greed. At the center of the story is George Amberson Minifer, the pampered but pitiful scion of the clan upon whose shoulders the fate of the family fortune will be won or lost. At once an exciting chronicle of a family's rise to fortune and its tortured downfall, it is also a fascinating portrait of the forces that shaped American society. So you can see at the beginning of the Pulitzer Prize, society was very concerned with changes to the social structure because of the Industrial Revolution. I believe there is another family other than the Ambersons who starts out poor and becomes rich by the end. So you see their rise with the Ambersons' fall. And it's sort of a commentary on that. And part of why I thought it would be really interesting to read the Pulitzer Prize winners one by one was because that seems to be the same basic thing that his family is interested in. So I'm really looking forward to The Magnificent Ambersons as well. I will get to it at some point. And then there were 2 books that I got from my library. My library sells used books, and they had A Complicated Kindness by Miriam Toews, which you can't really see very well because the light is going a little bit crazy. But I am a huge fan of All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Toews. I love Women Talking, which she also wrote, and this is something that, well, as soon as I saw it on the shelf, I had to have it. So, welcome to the world of Nomi Nickel, a tough, wry young woman trapped in a small Mennonite town that seeks to set her on the path to righteousness and smother her at the same time. In this work of fierce originality and brilliance, Miriam Toews explores the intricate binds of family and the forces that tear them apart. I'm going to leave it at that because I'm already hooked. I love stories about complicated families. It just gets me right here. And I am still very much looking forward to reading that. I also picked this one up because I was surprised I saw it there. It's A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor, Towles, which I've heard really great things about. Part of me is wondering, I mean, I got it for like $1.50, but part of me is kind of wondering if I should just listen to this on audio and leave it at that. I don't know, let me know what you think. With his breakout novel, Rules of Civility, Amor Towles established himself as a master of absorbing, sophisticated fiction, bringing late 1930s Manhattan to life with splendid atmosphere and a flawless command of style. A Gentleman in Moscow immerses us in another elegantly drawn era with the story of Count Alexander Rostov. When, in 1922, the 30-year-old Count is deemed an unrepentant aristocrat by a Bolshevik tribunal, he is sentenced to house arrest in the Metropole, a grand hotel across the street from the Kremlin. An indomitable man of erudition and wit, Rostov must now live in an attic room while some of the most tumultuous decades in Russian history are unfolding outside the hotel's doors. Unexpectedly, the Count's reduced circumstances provide him entry to a much larger world of emotional discovery as he forges friendships with the hotel's other denizens, including a willful actress, a shrewd Kremlinite, a gregarious American, and a temperamental chef. But when fate suddenly puts the life of a young girl in his hands, he must draw on all his ingenuity to protect the future she so deserves. I mean, it sounds really interesting, and I have heard so many good things about this. I've also heard good things about Rules of Civility, which I have also not read. So, yeah, still looking forward to getting around to this one. So, if you've been keeping score, that is 14 books that I brought into my library in the month of June 2019. I had already read 2 of them. Those 2 were Pride and Prejudice and Daisy Jones and the Six. I have since read 2 others, which are The Stonewall Reader and The Harbor. So I got a supplemental read for my Pulitzer Prize project. I just need to read the book that won the Pulitzer. So there you go. So that's 14 minus 2 is 12 minus 2 is 10. So I have 10 books on this that I still need to get to. But of those 10, I'm still really looking forward to getting to all of them. We'll be seeing when that will happen. I mean, this one's just pretty. If you have thoughts about any of these books, I would love to hear them. Like I said, I would also love to hear your thoughts on which Pride and Prejudice adaptation is the best. And I think that Persuasion is low-key one of Jane Austen's best books. What are your thoughts on that as well? Let's fight about Jane Austen in the comment section down below. Let's do that. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you for your time. I always appreciate it. And, you know, there's a lot going on in the world. It's tough times. Do something that sparks joy for you. I am going to edit this video tomorrow and go read something. Thank you for your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.